The crystal chandelier above table 12 had been flickering for 3 minutes, and nobody seemed to notice except Marina Volkov. She stood near the kitchen doors of Le Jardin Étoile, the white linen napkin draped over her left forearm growing damp from her nervous grip. The restaurant hummed with the usual Thursday evening energy, the clink of silverware against bone china, murmured conversations floating up toward the vaulted ceiling, the occasional burst of laughter from the bar area where after-work professionals gathered like moths around expensive wine. But table 12 was different tonight. Marina had been a waitress here for 4 years, long enough to recognize when a meal carried weight beyond the food. The 3 men seated there had arrived separately, each escorted by Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', who only personally seated guests when reservations came with certain codes in the system. The oldest man, perhaps 60, wore a suit that probably cost more than Marina's annual rent. His silver hair caught the unstable light from above, and his hands, weathered, capable hands, rested on either side of an untouched glass of Chateau Margaux. To his right sat a younger man, maybe 40, whose nervous energy manifested in the way he kept adjusting his tie, pulling at the Windsor not as if it were strangling him. His briefcase leaned against his chair leg, the leather worn at the corners from travel. And across from them both sat a man Marina had seen in business magazines kept in the employee break room, Dmitry Volkov. No relation, despite the shared surname. He was the reason table 12 mattered tonight. Marina had learned to read tables the way some people read books. The body language told stories before words ever could. The older man's rigid posture spoke of pride barely containing desperation. The younger man's fidgeting betrayed stakes higher than he wanted to admit. And Dmitry Volkov sat with the casual confidence of someone who knew he held all the cards and was deciding whether to play them or walk away from the table entirely. Marina. Pascal's voice cut through her observation, sharp as the chef's knives in the kitchen behind them. He appeared at her elbow, the restaurant manager's perpetual frown deepening the lines around his mouth. Table 12 is your section. Why are you hovering? The chandelier, she said, nodding upward. It's flickering. Should I mention it to maintenance? Pascal barely glanced up. After service. Table 12 has been waiting 4 minutes. Take their order. Marina smoothed her black apron, the fabric worn soft from hundreds of washes, and approached the table. She'd learned to make herself smaller in spaces like this, to project competent invisibility. Rich people didn't want their servers to have personalities. They wanted ghosts who materialized with food and disappeared when the plates were empty. Good evening, gentlemen, she said, her accent carefully neutral, the result of years practicing in front of her bathroom mirror. May I start you with some appetizers this evening? Or would you prefer to hear tonight's specials? The older man looked up at her, and Marina saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition? No, something else. Calculation. His gaze dropped to her name tag, then back to her face. What's your name? He asked. His accent carried the weight of somewhere far from here. Eastern European, she thought, though she couldn't place it exactly. Marina, sir. Marina. He tested the name like wine, rolling it around. You speak English very well. Is it your first language? Pascal's training kicked in, polite deflection, redirect to the menu, maintain professional distance. But something about the way the man asked made her pause. The younger man with the tie had gone very still, and Dmitry Volkov was watching her with sudden, sharp interest. Thank you, sir. English is one of several languages I speak. Now, for the appetizers. Several languages. The older man leaned forward slightly. Which languages? Marina felt the weight of Dmitry Volkov's attention like pressure against her skin. The chandelier above them flickered again, casting strange shadows across the white tablecloth. In the kitchen behind her, she could hear Chef Antoine shouting in French about undercooked risotto. The normal sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade into background noise. I speak several languages, sir, including Russian and Mandarin. But perhaps I could tell you about our seared scallops. They're exceptional tonight. The younger man's briefcase started to tip. He caught it quickly, but not before Marina saw the papers inside. Columns of numbers, charts with red arrows pointing downward, a header in what looked like Mandarin characters. He snapped it closed, but the damage was done. She'd seen. Dmitry Volkov smiled for the first time since sitting down. It wasn't a warm smile. Interesting, he said, and his voice carried a Moscow winter in it. Very interesting timing. The older man ignored him, still focused on Marina. You're Russian? Is it native? My grandmother was from Volgograd, sir. She raised me until I was 12. After she passed, I lived in various places. Language became, she paused, choosing her words carefully, necessary. Languages had been her escape, her armor, her way of building a self when nothing else felt solid. Would you gentlemen like a few more minutes to decide? Marina asked, trying to steer back to safe ground. No, the older man said. Please sit down. Marina froze. In 4 years at Le Jardin Étoile, no guest had ever asked her to sit. The request violated every protocol Pascal had drilled into the staff. She glanced toward the kitchen, where she could see Pascal watching through the circular window in the door, his face reddening. Sir, I'm not permitted to. I'll speak to the manager if needed. The older man interrupted. Please, sit, just for a moment. The younger man with the tie pulled out the 4th chair at the table. His hands shook slightly. Marina looked at Dmitry Volkov, whose expression had shifted from amused to genuinely curious. She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, her spine straight as a violin string. Before I continue with what happened next at that table, I need to pause here. If you're finding this story engaging so far, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories take considerable time and effort to research and present, and your support helps me continue creating content like this. Now, back to Marina's extraordinary evening. The older man extended his hand across the table. My name is Henrik Larsson. I own a manufacturing company based in Stockholm, industrial equipment, primarily. This is my son, Anders. He gestured to the tie-adjusting younger man. And you seem to already know Mr. Volkov. Marina shook his hand. His grip was firm, slightly desperate. I know of Mr. Volkov, sir. I don't actually know him. Then we're on equal footing there, Henrik said, and there was dark humor in his voice. I don't know him either, not really. But I need him. My company needs him. Anders Larsson leaned forward, his voice tight with stress. Papa, maybe we shouldn't involve. Your company? Dmitry Volkov interrupted, swirling the wine in his glass without drinking, is approximately 48 hours away from defaulting on a contract with the Tianming Corporation. A contract worth, if my information is correct, roughly 400 million euros. A contract that requires you to deliver equipment with specifications detailed in documents written in Mandarin. Documents your translator apparently misread in 3 critical sections. The chandelier flickered again. Marina's hands gripped the edge of her chair. Henrik's face had gone pale. How did you? I know many things, Mr. Larsson. I know that you came here tonight hoping I would invest enough capital to keep your production line running while you sort out this mess. I know that you're a proud man who spent 35 years building something from nothing. I know that Anders here has a wife and 2 children, and that 18 employees in your Stockholm facility have worked for you for over 20 years. I know all of this. Dmitry set his wine glass down with a soft click against the table. What I don't know is why I should care. The silence that followed felt like falling. Marina watched Henrik's jaw work, watched the way his capable hands curled into fists on the white tablecloth. She'd seen this before, not in restaurants, but in the faces of people at welfare offices, at job interviews, at the doors of landlords demanding rent. The specific look of someone watching their life collapse in real time. You should care, Henrik said finally, his voice rough, because you're not a monster. The research I did on you, you've donated to literacy programs, to immigrant support services. You built that community center in Berlin. Whatever ruthless reputation you have, there's something else there too. Dmitry laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. You mistake strategic philanthropy for sentiment, Mr. Larsson. Tax benefits have been very good to me. But let's say, hypothetically, that I'm moved by your situation. The amount you need, 2 million euros just to keep the doors open while you fix this translation disaster. That's not a small ask. And you have nothing to offer me as collateral. Your company is overleveraged. Your equipment is outdated. Your contracts are in jeopardy. You're asking me to throw money into a hole. Anders made a sound like a wounded animal. Marina saw his hand move to his pocket, then stop. A phone? Probably. A wife waiting to hear the news. Children who didn't know yet that their future had just become uncertain. The chandelier went dark completely. For a full second, table 12 sat in shadow, lit only by the ambient light from surrounding tables. Then it blazed back to life, brighter than before, and Marina saw something in that flash of illumination. The Mandarin characters on the corner of a document protruding from Anders's briefcase. She'd seen them before. Procurement specifications for heavy machinery, probably. The kind of document that would be 50 pages of technical terminology and legal clauses. Mr. Volkov, Marina heard herself say, "May I ask what would make you interested in helping Mr. Larson?" 3 sets of eyes turned to her. Pascal was going to fire her. This was so far beyond appropriate server behavior that there wasn't even a section in the manual that covered it. Dmitri studied her for a long moment. "You have an opinion on my business decisions?" "No, sir. But I have a skill you might find useful." "Marina," Henrik started, but she continued. "I can read Mandarin, not just conversationally. I can read technical documents, contracts, specifications, and I can do it quickly." She looked at Anders. "Your translator made mistakes. I assume you don't have time to hire another one, verify their work, and resubmit to Tianming Corporation before your deadline." Anders stared at her. "How could you possibly? The characters on your document. I saw 3 of them. They're technical terms related to pressure valve specifications. I'm guessing your translator confused similar-looking characters, maybe 4, or mixed up valve types. A common mistake if someone isn't familiar with industrial engineering terminology." The silence at the table was different now. Charged. Dmitri set down his wine glass and folded his hands, giving Marina his complete attention for the first time. "That's very specific knowledge for a waitress. I spent 2 years working nights at a manufacturing plant while studying during the day. The owner was Chinese, and most of the safety documentation was in Mandarin. I learned to read it or risk getting hurt by equipment I didn't understand." Marina's heart hammered against her ribs. She was free-falling now. No idea where she'd land. "I never finished my degree, couldn't afford to, but I learned the language. Deeply." Henrik's hands had uncurled. "You could review our documents? Identify the errors. I could do more than that. I could translate them correctly, draft a correction notice to Tianming Corporation explaining the mistake, and communicate directly with their procurement team in their language. I could probably do it in 12 hours if I had access to the files and a computer." 12 hours, Anders breathed. "Our deadline is in 48. Dmitri Volkov was smiling again, but this time it reached his eyes. "Now this," he said, "is interesting. Mr. Larson, you came here asking for a miracle wrapped in currency, but perhaps the miracle has a different shape than you imagined." He turned to Marina. "If you can do what you claim, if you can review these documents, correct the errors, and communicate effectively with Tianming Corporation, then I see a path forward. Not my money as a gift, Mr. Larson, but an investment. A stake in your company, small enough to leave you in control but large enough to matter to me. And her services as the bridge that saves your contract." Marina felt the world tilt. "I have a job. I work here." "You have employment," Dmitri corrected. "That's different from a job that actually uses your skills and pays what you're worth." It hurt because it was true. Marina thought about her apartment. A studio in the city's cheapest district, where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing at 3 in the morning. She thought about her bank account, which never held more than $800 at a time. "What exactly are you proposing?" Henrik asked carefully. "A test," Dmitri said. "Marina reviews your documents tonight. If she finds the errors and can fix them, I invest 2 million euros for a 15% stake in your company. She becomes a paid consultant on this contract and any future projects requiring translation services. If she can't," he shrugged, "then we all go home, and you declare bankruptcy next week." Anders looked at his father. Henrik looked at Marina, and Marina looked at the chandelier above them, finally steady in its light, casting everything in sharp, clear illumination. "I need to tell my manager I'm leaving," Marina said. Pascal was waiting by the kitchen, his face the color of a ripe tomato. "Have you lost your mind? You sit at a table with guests? You discuss business? This is not done, Marina. This is—" "I quit," Marina said, untying her apron. The fabric fell into her hands, for years of serving compressed into a square of black cloth. "I'm sorry, Pascal. You gave me a job when I needed one. But I need to do something else now. You can't just— There are procedures, 2 weeks' notice." "I know, but this matters more." She folded the apron carefully and set it on the hostess stand. "Tell Chef Antoine his risotto was always perfect, no matter what he said. And tell Jean-Pierre that table 7 always tips better if you recommend the Chilean sea bass instead of the salmon." She walked back to table 12, where 3 men watched her with different expressions. Henrik with hope, Anders with cautious relief, and Dmitri with something that might have been respect. "I'll need those documents," Marina said. "All of them, and strong coffee. It's going to be a long night." Outside Le Jardin Étoile, the city moved on, indifferent to the small revolution happening inside. The chandelier above table 12 burned steady and bright, witness to the moment when Marina Volkov stopped being invisible and became, instead, necessary. The young man named Anders pulled out his briefcase with trembling hands and set it on the table. As he opened it, Marina saw her future spilling out in pages of technical Mandarin, in columns of numbers that represented people's livelihoods, in the desperate hope written across a father's face. She saw the possibility. She saw terror. She saw the chance to be more than the girl who'd learned languages to survive, to become instead the woman who used them to build something real. "Let's begin," she said, and reached for the first document. But perhaps, in some way, she'd been preparing for exactly this moment from the day her grandmother first placed a Russian-English dictionary in her small hands and said, "With every language you speak, you gain a new self." Marina had gained many selves. Tonight, she would discover what they could build together. The break room was a windowless box carved out of what had probably been a storage closet. 2 mismatched chairs, a microwave that heated food unevenly, and a bulletin board covered with health department regulations and a faded poster of the Swiss Alps. Sasha, one of the other waitresses, sat across from her, scrolling through her phone while eating leftover bread the kitchen staff was going to throw away. "My sister's getting married," Sasha had said without looking up. "Destination wedding in Greece. Everyone's expected to attend. Will you go?" Marina had asked. "Can't afford it. I already told her I'm working that weekend." Sasha had shrugged, but Marina saw the way her friend's jaw tightened. "She'll understand, or she won't. Either way, the tables here need serving." That moment, watching Sasha pretend not to care about missing her own sister's wedding because plane tickets cost more than 2 weeks' worth of tips. That's when Marina understood she'd been confusing survival with success. She'd been so proud of making rent, of never missing a shift, of being reliable. But reliability wasn't the same as building a life. It was just not dying while time passed. Marina's day started at 5:30 every morning, not because of Le Jardin Étoile's schedule, but because of her own. The apartment building where she lived had paper-thin walls, and her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, began every day by playing traditional Chinese opera at a volume that suggested she believed everyone within a 3-block radius should appreciate classical music. Rather than resent it, Marina had learned to use it. She'd pull herself from the narrow bed, a mattress on a frame she'd found on the street and scrubbed clean with bleach, and sit at the small desk under her room's single window. The desk held her treasures. A laptop she'd bought used for $200, its screen cracked in one corner but functional. 3 notebooks where she practiced writing in different languages. A photograph of her grandmother, sepia-toned and softened by age, standing in front of a building Marina had never seen in a city she'd never visited, and a jar that held her someday money, currently containing $47.32. While Mrs. Chen's opera filtered through the wall, Marina would open her laptop and work through language exercises. Today is Thursday. It is raining. The store opens at 9 o'clock. Simple sentences in Mandarin, then Russian, then French. She'd time herself, watching how quickly she could shift between them. It wasn't just about knowing the words. It was about thinking in the language, feeling the different rhythms and grammatical structures like changing clothes. Her grandmother had taught her that. Nadia Volkova had lived through things Marina could barely imagine. War, displacement, the slow starvation of a country eating itself. She'd arrived in America with Marina's infant mother and a suitcase that held 3 books. Pushkin poems, a Russian-English dictionary, and a cookbook from Volgograd that had belonged to her own mother. When Marina's parents died, a car accident on a highway outside Chicago, when Marina was 5, it had been Nadia who appeared like a force of nature, collecting her granddaughter from temporary foster care and rebuilding a world around them both. Nadia had been a teacher in Russia, though her credentials meant nothing in America. She'd worked as a house cleaner, a grocery store stocker, and eventually a caregiver for elderly Russian immigrants. She'd saved every spare dollar and used it to buy Marina books. Not toys, not trendy clothes, but books. Grammar textbooks, novels in different languages, dictionaries. Their apartment had been a library disguised as a home. When Nadia died of a stroke, sudden as a door slamming, no warning, just there one morning and gone by afternoon. 12-year-old Marina had been left with nothing but those books and the languages living in her head. The foster care system had swallowed her whole. She'd bounced between 5 families in 6 years, some indifferent, some actively cruel. She'd learned that being useful meant being kept, so she'd made herself useful. She'd cleaned houses, watched younger children, translated for foster parents who had dealings with non-English speakers. At 16, she'd been placed with the Johnsons, a couple who ran a dry cleaning business. They'd been kind in their way, giving her work in exchange for rent once she aged out of the system. She'd stayed until 19, saving every dollar she could, then struck out on her own with a backpack full of books and $800 that felt like $8 million. The manufacturing plant job had been her first real employment. Midnight to 6 a.m., inspecting parts as they came off the assembly line. The owner, Mr. Liu, had hired her despite her lack of experience because she'd walked in speaking Mandarin. Most of his workers were Chinese immigrants, and communication problems had been causing safety issues. Marina became the bridge. She'd learned technical terminology out of necessity. When someone's hand might get caught in machinery, vocabulary became a matter of life and death. She'd enrolled in community college during that time, studying international business during the day and working nights. For 2 years, she'd survived on 4 hours of sleep, coffee, and the stubborn belief that education was her ladder out. Then Mr. Liu's plant had closed, outsourced to somewhere labor was even cheaper, and Marina's financial aid had evaporated along with her income. She'd been 3 semesters from graduation when she'd had to choose between tuition and rent. Lucrative had hired her the same week she'd withdrawn from school. They'd needed someone who spoke French for their European clientele. Pascal had seemed impressed by her resume, which was mostly fiction. She'd listed her community college coursework as degree studies in international business, and described her manufacturing job as technical liaison for multinational corporation. It wasn't exactly lying. It was translation, taking the truth and rendering it in a language that would get her through the door. For years later, she was still walking through that door every shift, tying on the black apron, becoming invisible. Marina's morning routine, after language practice, involved a shower in the apartment building's shared bathroom. Her studio had a toilet and sink, but the shower was down the hall, shared with 3 other units. She'd learned to keep her shower supplies in a plastic caddy she could carry back and forth, learned which times of day the water was hottest, learned to wash quickly and efficiently because privacy was an illusion here. Breakfast was whatever was cheapest at the corner store. Usually yogurt that was about to expire, they'd sell it for half price, and fruit that was bruised but still edible. She'd eat standing at her small counter, listening to Spanish news radio to keep that language sharp, watching the street below through her window. The view showed the city in its most honest state. This neighborhood didn't make it into tourism brochures. The buildings were old enough to sag, their facades stained by weather and neglect. The sidewalks cracked like dry riverbeds. But there was life here, real life. Mrs. Chun watering the struggling tomato plants she kept in buckets on the fire escape. The Torres family heading out together, the father in construction gear, the mother in medical scrubs, the kids in school uniforms. Mr. Johnson from the corner store, opening his metal security gates, transforming his shop from fortress to business. These were Marina's people, not because she knew them well, but because they understood the same mathematics of survival. They knew how to make $5 feel like 20. They knew which bus routes were free if you timed the driver rotations right. They knew that day-old bread from the bakery was half price at closing time. They knew that community was built in the spaces between official systems, in the favors traded and the information shared. Marina would leave for work at 10:30 a.m. for her 11 o'clock shift. The bus ride took 40 minutes, winding through the city's geography of inequality. She'd watch the neighborhoods change through the window, from her area of immigrant families and service workers, through the middle-class districts where trees lined clean streets, and finally into the district where Lucardin resided, where the buildings were maintained with the kind of care that money guaranteed. During the bus ride, she'd listen to German language podcasts. She was still working on German, her weakest language. The grammar tangled in her mind like barbed wire. But she kept at it, playing and replaying lessons until the conjugations started to feel natural. The other bus passengers probably thought she was listening to music, head tilted back, eyes closed. They didn't know she was inside the architecture of another language, building new rooms in her consciousness. Le Jardin Étoile occupied the ground floor of a historic building that had once been a private mansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows, original crown molding, a terrace that overlooked a private garden where herbs grew in careful rows. The lunch shift would carry her through until 3. Then she'd have a break until the dinner service started at 5:30. During that break, Marina usually retreated to the back alley behind the restaurant, a narrow space between buildings where the kitchen staff came to smoke. She didn't smoke, but she liked the alley anyway. It was the only place in the restaurant where you could drop the performance of service, where you could exist as yourself rather than as a function. Carlos, one of the line cooks, would practice his English with her. Yuki, the sushi chef, would share photos of her daughter back in Tokyo. Everyone had a story of how they'd ended up here, working in the spaces between luxury and survival. "You're too smart for this job," Carlos had told her once, stubbing out his cigarette against the brick wall. "You speak like 5 languages, right? You should be working at the UN or something." "The UN doesn't hire people without degrees," Marina had replied. "And degrees cost money I don't have." "That's a trap, you know," Yuki had said quietly. "They make the ladder so expensive to climb that we stay down here serving the people at the top." That conversation stayed with Marina. She'd thought about it during slow moments on the floor, when she'd stand near the kitchen doors watching wealthy diners who never looked at their servers' faces. She'd thought about the careful invisibility she maintained, the way she trained herself to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to be present but unnoticed. The dinner shift would finally end around 10:30 at night. Marina would help with closing duties, filling salt and pepper shakers, folding napkins, restocking silverware. Pascal would count the register while the servers divided tips. On a good night, Marina might clear $80 in tips. On a bad night, maybe 40. It averaged out to about $500 a week, which translated to roughly $1,800 a month after accounting for slow periods. Her rent was $1,200. Utilities, phone, and internet added another $200. That left $400 for everything else: food, clothing, the student loans she was still paying from her incomplete degree, and any emergency that emerged. There was no room for actual savings, no capacity for investment in her future. She was treading water in a pool that never got shallower. The bus ride home would happen near midnight. The city transformed into something different in darkness. Marina would watch the streets and think about her grandmother. Nadia used to tell stories about Volgograd, about the city rebuilt from rubble after the war, about resilience built into architecture and people alike. "They tried to erase us," Nadia would say. "They tried to burn us down to nothing. But we rebuilt. We remembered. That's what matters, Mariska. Not whether you get knocked down, but whether you remember who you are when you stand back up." Marina would arrive back at her building after midnight, climbing the 3 flights of stairs to her studio. She'd change into the oversized t-shirt she slept in, brush her teeth at the small sink, and lie down in the narrow bed. Through the wall, she could sometimes hear Mrs. Chen's television, the sounds of Mandarin dramas filtering through. She'd made a game of translating the dialogue without watching, testing her comprehension. Sleep would come eventually, though rarely peacefully. Marina dreamed in multiple languages. Sometimes she'd wake up with fragments of Russian poetry in her head, lines from Pushkin her grandmother had recited. Sometimes she'd dream in Mandarin, conversations with people she'd never met in places she'd never been. The languages lived inside her like multiple selves, each offering a different lens on the same reality. On weekends, when she wasn't working, Marina would go to the public library. The central branch had free internet, comfortable chairs, and, most importantly, nobody cared how long you stayed. She'd spend hours there, reading news in different languages, practicing translation, sometimes helping other library patrons who struggled with English. The reference librarian, Ms. Washington, had taken a liking to her. "You should be in school," Ms. Washington had said more than once. "You've got the kind of mind that needs feeding." "I was in school," Marina would reply. "Life happened. Life always happens. The question is whether you let it happen to you, or whether you happen to it." Marina had written that down in one of her notebooks, along with vocabulary words and grammar rules. She'd collected wisdom the way other people collected stamps, pressing phrases into her memory for later examination. There were days when the weight of her life felt crushing. Days when she'd serve tables and watch people spend $300 on dinner without thought, knowing that amount would transform her entire month. Days when she'd go home and cry in the shower because she was 26 years old with languages in her head and skills in her hands, and none of it seemed to matter because she didn't have the right credentials, the right connections, the right background. But there were other days too. Days when a tourist would struggle with English and Marina would switch to their language, watching relief flood their face. Days when she'd translate for Mrs. Chun at the doctor's office, helping the elderly woman understand her medication instructions. Days when she'd help the Torah's kids with their homework, switching between Spanish and English to explain concepts they struggled with. Those were the days when Marina understood that her grandmother's gift, the languages, the books, the stubborn insistence that knowledge was worth sacrificing for, had value beyond dollar signs. They were days when she remembered who she was when she stood back up. The Thursday that would change everything started like any other. 5:30 a.m. wake up to Mrs. Chen's opera. Language practice at the desk under the window. Shower down the hall. Yogurt and bruised fruit for breakfast. The bus ride through the city's geography of inequality. German podcast playing in her ears. The city waking up around her in 5 different languages. She'd tied on her apron at 11 a.m., reviewed her section with Pascal, and prepared to be invisible for another shift. She'd had no idea that table 12 would be different. No idea that the chandelier would flicker. No idea that years of preparation would converge in a single evening, transforming survival into something else entirely. But perhaps, in some way, she'd been preparing for exactly this moment from the day her grandmother first placed a Russian-English dictionary in her small hands and said, "With every language you speak, you gain a new self." Marina had gained many selves. Tonight, she would discover what they could build together. Dmitry Volkov's office occupied the top floor of a building that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed wealth should be intimidating. All glass and steel and sharp angles, the kind of architecture that didn't apologize for taking up space in the skyline. Marina stood in the lobby at 1:47 in the morning, still wearing her server's clothes, holding Anders Larsson's briefcase like it contained explosives. Which, in a way, it did. Inside were documents that represented hundreds of jobs, millions of dollars, and a family's legacy built over 3.5 decades. No pressure. The security guard at the desk, a young man whose name tag read James, looked up from his monitor with undisguised skepticism. "Ma'am, the building is closed to visitors." "Mr. Volkov is expecting me," Marina said, though she wasn't entirely sure this was true. They'd left the restaurant separately, Dmitry giving her this address and telling her he'd send access authorization to the front desk. "Marina Volkov. I should be on the list." James typed something into his computer, frowned, typed again. His skepticism deepened. Nobody by that name. His computer pinged. He read something on the screen, and his expression transformed entirely. I apologize, Ms. Volkov. You're cleared for the executive floor. Elevator bank C. Use this key card for floor access. He handed her a slim white card that looked like it cost more than her weekly paycheck. Mr. Volkov's office is to the left when you exit. The elevator was the kind of elevator that Marina had only seen in movies. All mirrors and soft lighting, rising so smoothly she barely felt the movement. The only sound was a faint classical music from invisible speakers. Mozart, she thought. One of the piano concertos. Even the elevator in this building was educated. Floor 37 lit up. The doors whispered open. Dmitry Volkov's office wasn't what Marina expected. She'd anticipated sterile corporate minimalism, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small. Instead, she walked into something that felt almost like a library. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with volumes in multiple languages. A massive desk sat near the windows, which offered a view of the city spread out like a circuit board, lights twinkling in the darkness. And in the center of the room, a conference table where Henrik and Anders Larsson already sat, looking exhausted and hopeful and terrified all at once. Dmitry stood by the window, holding a crystal tumbler with amber liquid that caught the light. He turned as Marina entered, and she saw him really look at her for the first time. Not as a server, not as a potential solution to a problem, but as a person he was actually seeing. You came, he said. It wasn't a question, but there was something in his tone that suggested he hadn't been entirely certain. I said I would. Marina set the briefcase on the conference table. Though I should mention I've never done anything like this before. If you're expecting professional consulting experience. I'm not, Dmitry interrupted, moving from the window to take a seat at the conference table. Professional consultants charge $500 an hour and produce reports no one reads. What I'm expecting is someone who can actually read Mandarin technical documentation and tell these gentlemen whether their company is about to implode. He gestured to the empty chair beside Henrik. Sit. Coffee? Please, Marina said, sinking into the chair. The leather was so soft it felt like an apology for every uncomfortable surface she'd ever sat on. Dmitry pressed a button on his desk phone. Margot, for coffees to my office. Strong. And see if the kitchen has anything resembling food. We're going to be here a while. A voice crackled back in German. Marina understood it perfectly. At 2 in the morning, Dmitry? You're going to kill yourself with these hours. Dmitry responded in the same language, his accent flawless. My demise has been greatly exaggerated. Coffee, please. He noticed Marina's smile. You speak German too? Conversationally. Your assistant sounds like she's from Bavaria. Munich, maybe? Stuttgart, actually. Close enough. Dmitry pulled his chair closer to the table. All right, Mr. Larsson. Show her everything. Anders opened the briefcase with trembling hands and began extracting documents. Purchase orders. Technical specifications. Engineering diagrams. Email chains. And at the bottom, a contract thick as a novel. Its pages dense with Chinese characters that seemed to swim in Marina's vision as exhaustion pressed against her eyes. The main contract is 217 pages, Anders said, his voice hoarse. We hired a translation firm, reputable we thought, to render everything into Swedish and English. But 3 weeks ago, Tianming Corporation sent back our first equipment delivery. Said it didn't match specifications. We thought maybe it was a manufacturing error on our end, but when we checked, he rubbed his face with both hands. The specifications we were working from were wrong. The translation was wrong. Henrik picked up the thread, his accent thickening with emotion. We've been building industrial pneumatic systems for 35 years. We know our work. But we were building to the wrong blueprint because someone confused pressure ratings, valve types, material specifications. 3 critical sections, all mistranslated. Marina pulled the contract toward her, opening to a random page. The characters resolved into meaning almost immediately, her brain performing the translation automatically, the way some people could hear music and know the notes. This section dealt with pressure vessel specifications, the kind of equipment that, if built incorrectly, could literally explode. Your translator confused with, Marina said, running her finger down the column of text. Pressure vessel versus hydraulic vessel. Similar characters, completely different engineering requirements. And here, she flipped forward several pages. They translated as rust-resistant steel, when it specifically means stainless steel. That's not just a terminology difference. That's a material science error that could cause structural failure. Anders made a sound between a laugh and a sob. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what happened. We built the first units with the wrong steel alloy because we were following the wrong specifications. How many units did you complete? Marina asked. 87, Henrik said. All unusable. All built to specifications that don't match what Tianming ordered. We had to scrap them. The raw materials alone cost us 300,000 euros. And we have, he checked his watch, 46 hours to deliver replacement units that match the actual contract specifications, or we're in breach. Margot appeared, a woman in her 50s wearing a sweater and jeans, carrying a tray with 4 coffee cups and a plate of sandwiches. She set everything down with efficient grace, gave Dmitri a look that clearly communicated her opinion of his work hours, and departed without a word. Marina grabbed a coffee and drank it black, feeling the caffeine hit her system like electricity. Okay, walk me through your production timeline. If I can verify the correct specifications tonight, right now, how fast can you actually build the replacement units? Henrik and Anders exchanged looks. Henrik spoke first. Our facility in Stockholm has 2 production lines. If we run both lines 24 hours a day with double shifts, we can produce approximately 30 units per day. Tianming ordered 87 units total, delivered in 1 shipment. So 3 days of production, Marina calculated. But you said your deadline is in 46 hours. It is, Anders confirmed, which means we've already failed. Even if we start production immediately with the correct specifications, we can't physically manufacture 87 units in less than 3 days. Dmitri had been quiet, listening. Now he leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Unless you negotiate an extension with Tianming. They've already denied 2 extension requests, Henrik said bitterly. They're within their rights per the contract. Late delivery means penalties. 20,000 euros per day for the first week. 50,000 per day after that. Even if they grant an extension, the financial penalties will bankrupt us. Marina was reading the contract again, flipping through pages, her mind working in Mandarin now, thinking in the language of the document. What if you could explain to Tianming that the delay was caused by a translation error on your end, not manufacturing incompetence? What if you could demonstrate that you're now working with verified specifications and request a modified delivery schedule? Not an extension of the original deadline, but a restructured timeline that accounts for the correction process. They'd still deny it, Anders said. They need the equipment for a project of their own. They have deadlines. Maybe, Marina agreed. But the contract here, Section 47, subsection C, there's a clause about good faith modifications in the event of clerical or administrative errors that do not reflect the manufacturing capability or reputation of the supplier. If we can frame this as an administrative error in translation, not a competence failure, and if we can communicate that in Mandarin directly to their executive team rather than going through their procurement department bureaucracy. She looked up and found 3 men staring at her. What? She said. You've been reading that contract for 4 minutes, Dmitri said slowly, and you've already found a clause that their original translator missed? Well, their translator was probably focused on the technical specifications, not the legal framework. This is buried in the dispute resolution section. But yes, this clause exists. It's not a guarantee, but it's leverage. Henrik was shaking his head, not in denial but in something close to wonder. Who are you? Someone who's very good at reading contracts at 2 in the morning, Marina said, taking another gulp of coffee. Look, here's what I can do tonight. Verify every technical specification in this document, create a master list of corrections, and draft a communication to Tianming Corporation explaining the situation. But you need to understand, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a professional translator. I'm someone who can read Mandarin and who worked in a factory long enough to understand pressure valves. If you need official credentials, Dmitri cut her off, are pieces of paper that tell you someone paid tuition. What we need is someone who can actually do the work. Can you? Marina looked at the stack of documents. 217 pages of contract. 53 pages of technical specifications. Email chains in Mandarin discussing delivery schedules, payment terms, quality control measures. It was conservatively 15 to 20 hours of focused work. I can do it, she said, but not in 12 hours. I was optimistic at the restaurant. This is more complex than I thought. I'd need 24 hours minimum, maybe 30. You have until 6 p.m. tomorrow, Dmitri said. 30 hours from now. That gives us time to review your work, for Mr. Larson to adjust production schedules, and for me to make some calls on their behalf. Wait, Marina said. You're going to help them? Dmitri smiled that cold smile again. Ms. Volkov, I don't invest in failing companies out of sentiment. But I do invest in competence when I see it. If you can do what you claim, then Larson Industries isn't failing. It's experiencing a temporary technical difficulty that has an actual solution. That's investable. He turned to Henrik. The terms I mentioned at the restaurant stand. 2 million euros for 15% equity. But contingent on Ms. Volkov here successfully correcting your documentation and Tianming agreeing to a modified delivery schedule. And if they don't agree? Henrik asked. Then you declare bankruptcy, and I'm out the cost of tonight's coffee. Dmitri stood. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. Margot will set you up in the conference room down the hall. It has a better workspace. Ms. Volkov, you'll need a computer, use the one in there. It has translation software if you need it, though I suspect you won't. Marina stood, grabbing 2 more sandwiches from the plate. I'll need the contact information for Tianming's executive team, and I'll need someone who can verify my technical translations. I'm confident in my Mandarin, but if I miss something in the engineering terminology, people could get hurt. I can review the technical aspects, Henrik said. I've been building this equipment for 35 years. If you give me the specifications in English, I'll know if they're correct. Good. Then let's get started. The conference room down the hall was smaller but immaculately equipped. A massive table, a computer with 3 monitors, a printer, and a whiteboard that covered an entire wall. Marina set up her workspace like she was preparing for battle. Documents organized by category, notebook open for questions, coffee within reach. Anders stayed to help her navigate the file structure, explaining which documents connected to which, walking her through the timeline of events. Henrik disappeared with Dmitri. Marina caught fragments of their conversation in the hallway, something about production line capacity and material procurement. By 3:30 a.m., Marina had completed her first pass through the main contract. She'd found 17 significant errors, not just the 3 critical ones Anders had mentioned, but 14 others ranging from minor terminology mistakes to one absolutely terrifying misunderstanding about safety valve pressure ratings. If they'd built equipment according to that specification, someone could have died. She made notes in 3 columns. The incorrect Chinese text, the correct interpretation, and the English translation. Her handwriting got messy as exhaustion crept in, but her mind stayed sharp. This was what she'd been training for without knowing it. All those mornings practicing at her desk, all those hours at the manufacturing plant learning technical vocabulary, all those years of turning language into survival. Anders fell asleep around 4 a.m., his head on the conference table, still clutching his phone. Marina kept working. She worked through the technical specifications, cross-referencing them against the contract language, building a comprehensive map of every place the original translation had failed. At 5:30, the sky outside the windows began to lighten. Not sunrise yet, but the promise of it. Marina's eyes burned. Her back ached from sitting. But she was in the rhythm now, her brain moving faster than her hands could write. Henrik appeared with fresh coffee at 6:15. You should rest. I'll rest when this is done, Marina said without looking up. Did you bring the production timeline I asked for? He laid a sheet of paper beside her. She scanned it quickly. If they started production by midnight tonight with verified specifications, they could have the first 30 units completed in 48 hours, the second batch in 72 hours, and the final batch in 96 hours. Total timeline: 4 days from start to finish. Okay, Marina said, adding notes to her growing document. So what we need from Tianming is a modified delivery schedule. First partial shipment in 48 hours, second in 72 hours, final in 96 hours. We frame it as an accommodation for a translation correction. Cite the contract clause about good faith modifications, and emphasize that Larsen Industries is absorbing all costs associated with the correction. They'll still impose penalties, Henrik said quietly. Maybe. But smaller penalties for partial late delivery are better than catastrophic penalties for complete breach. Marina finally looked up at him. Mr. Larsen, I need to ask you something. How much of your company's survival depends on this contract? Henrik sat down heavily. All of it. We've been struggling for 5 years. Manufacturing in Europe isn't profitable anymore. Everyone sources from Asia, from places where labor costs 1/10 of what it does in Stockholm. This contract with Tianming was supposed to prove we could compete, that quality and precision still matter. If we lose it, he spread his hands. 18 families lose their income. A 35-year legacy disappears. My son's children grow up knowing their grandfather failed. Marina had heard variations of this story before in different languages in different contexts. The story of people who'd built something real being crushed by forces they couldn't control, globalization, market forces, the mathematical reality that labor was a commodity and commodities went where they were cheapest. You're not going to fail, Marina said. She surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. Not if I can help it. She turned back to the computer and began drafting the communication to Tianming Corporation. She wrote in Mandarin first, letting the language flow naturally, using the formal register appropriate for business communication of this importance. She explained the translation error, cited the specific contract clause, proposed the modified delivery schedule, and emphasized Larsen Industries' 3-decade reputation for quality and precision. Then she did something the original translator probably hadn't. She researched Tianming Corporation's executive structure, found the names of the procurement director, the operations manager, and the CEO, learned how to properly address each of them according to Chinese business etiquette, which titles to use, which phrases would convey respect without servility. By 8 a.m., she had a complete draft. By 9 a.m., she'd refined it 3 times. By 10 a.m., she'd cross-referenced every technical term against industry-standard Mandarin engineering dictionaries she found online. By 11 a.m., she was confident enough to show it to Henrik. He read her English translation slowly, his lips moving slightly as he processed each line. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. I want to pause Marina's story here briefly. If you're invested in finding out whether she succeeds in saving Larsen Industries, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who appreciates stories about unexpected opportunities. It really helps the channel grow. Now, let's see Henrik's reaction to Marina's work. This is perfect, he said hoarsely. You've given us a chance. A real chance. We still need Tianming to agree, Marina cautioned. And we need to get your corrected specifications into production immediately. Already handled, said Dimitri's voice from the doorway. Marina turned to see him enter, looking somehow fresh despite the fact that he'd been awake as long as she had. Henrik and I spent the last few hours on the phone with his production managers in Stockholm. They're ready to start manufacturing as soon as they receive verified specifications, which they'll have in... Marina checked the time, 3 hours. I need to finish the technical specification corrections. Henrik needs to verify them, and then we can send everything. Dimitri nodded. Then finish. I've arranged a call with Tianming Corporation's executive team for 6 p.m. tonight. You'll present your findings and proposals directly to them. Marina's stomach dropped. I'll what? Present. To them. Directly. Dimitri's expression was unreadable. They don't know who you are, which means they don't have preconceptions. You'll explain the situation in fluent Mandarin, demonstrate comprehensive understanding of both the technical requirements and the contract language, and make them see that working with Larsen Industries serves their interests better than pushing them into bankruptcy. I'm not a negotiator. I don't have experience with. You have every skill this requires, Dmitri interrupted. What you lack is confidence, which is different. Confidence you can fake until it becomes real. Marina wanted to argue, wanted to explain that there was a vast difference between translating documents and actually negotiating with executives of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But she looked at Henrik's exhausted, hopeful face, thought about 18 families in Stockholm, thought about her grandmother saying language is freedom, and heard herself say, "Okay, I'll do it." The next 7 hours were a blur of work so intense that time seemed to compress. Marina finished the technical specifications. Henrik verified every measurement, every material grade, every pressure rating. Anders woke up, reviewed the procurement requirements, and confirmed they could source all necessary materials in time. At 3 p.m., Marina sent the corrected specifications to Stockholm. At 4 p.m., Henrik received confirmation that production had begun. At 5 p.m., Marina rehearsed her presentation with Dmitri, who interrupted her 6 times to make her speak with more authority, to eliminate qualifiers like, "I think," and "maybe," to stand straighter and project her voice like someone who believed what she was saying. At 5:45 p.m. Thursday evening, they gathered in Dmitri's office around a computer screen. The video call would connect them to Tianming Corporation's headquarters in Shanghai, where it was already 6:45 a.m. Friday morning. Marina's hands shook. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady them. "Remember," Dmitri said quietly, "you're not asking for a favor. You're offering a solution. There's a difference." At exactly 6 p.m., the call connected. 3 faces appeared on the screen. 2 men and 1 woman, all middle-aged, all wearing expressions of careful professionalism that barely masked irritation at having to take a call this early about a supplier who'd already proven incompetent. Marina took a breath, centered herself, and began speaking in Mandarin. "Good morning, distinguished colleagues. My name is Marina Volkov, and I'm calling on behalf of Larsen Industries to discuss the recent delivery difficulties with contract TM 447-2025. I want to begin by acknowledging that Larsen Industries takes full responsibility for these difficulties and has identified the root cause. A comprehensive translation error in the original contract rendering that led to manufacturing based on incorrect specifications." She watched their faces carefully. The woman, Marina had learned her name was Wei Ling, Director of International Procurement, leaned forward slightly, her interest caught by Marina's formal but fluent Mandarin. Marina continued, walking them through the errors she'd found, explaining each mistranslation with specific examples, demonstrating that she understood not just the language but the technical requirements. She showed them the clause about good faith modifications. She presented the revised delivery schedule with precise timelines. And then she made the argument that would either save Larsen Industries or end them. "Honored Director Wei, Honorable Managers Chun and Zhang, I understand that Larsen Industries' error has caused disruption to your project timeline. I also understand that the contract permits significant financial penalties for late delivery. However, I would like to propose that Tianming Corporation has an opportunity here to demonstrate something more valuable than penalty collection. The kind of flexible partnership that distinguishes truly excellent corporations from merely competent ones." She saw Wei Ling's eyebrow raise, saw Manager Chun hide what might have been a smile. Larsen Industries has maintained a reputation for precision and quality for 35 years. This translation error, caused by a third-party contractor, not by Larsen's engineering team, does not reflect their manufacturing capability. By allowing them to correct this error and fulfill the contract under a modified timeline, Tianming Corporation demonstrates wisdom and long-term strategic thinking. You gain a supplier who will be grateful for your flexibility, who will prioritize your needs in future contracts, and who will remember that Tianming values partnership over punishment. Marina paused, letting her words settle. Then she added, in a tone that was respectful but carried quiet steel, "Alternatively, you can enforce maximum penalties, bankrupt a European manufacturer with excellent capabilities, and send a signal to other potential suppliers that Tianming prioritizes contractual rigidity over problem solving. I respectfully suggest that the first option serves your interests better. The silence on the call stretched. Marina's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Beside her, Henrik had gone perfectly still. Finally, Wei Ling spoke. Her Mandarin was sharp, precise. Ms. Volkov, are you a professional translator? No, Director Wei. Are you a contract negotiator? No. Then what are you? Marina thought about her grandmother, about languages learned in foster care and factories, about 4 years of serving tables to people who never saw her face. She thought about the choice she'd made last night to stand up from table 12 and walk into something unknown. I'm someone who understands that language is the bridge between problems and solutions, Marina said. And I'm someone who believes that Larsen Industries deserves a chance to prove their actual capabilities, rather than being judged on a translation error. Wei Ling looked at someone off-screen, and appeared to have a brief conversation Marina couldn't hear. Then she turned back to the camera. We will grant a modified delivery schedule, she said. First partial shipment in 60 hours, not 48. We need time to adjust our own timeline. Second shipment in 96 hours. Final shipment in 120 hours. Financial penalties will be reduced to €5,000 per day for the delays, not 20,000. And this accommodation is granted one time only. Future contracts will be held to original specifications without exception. Marina felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. Thank you, Director Wei. Tianming Corporation's flexibility will not be forgotten. See that it isn't Ms. Volkov. And see that Larsen Industries delivers equipment that matches your corrected specifications exactly. We will be inspecting every unit with particular attention. Understood completely. The call disconnected. For a moment, no one moved. Then Henrik grabbed Marina and hugged her so hard her ribs creaked. And Anders was laughing and crying simultaneously, and Dmitri was standing by the window with his arms crossed, wearing an expression that might have been satisfaction. You just saved a company, he said to Marina. We just saved a company, Marina corrected. She felt lightheaded, drunk on exhaustion and adrenaline. All of us. No, Henrik said, still gripping her shoulders. You did this. I don't know how to thank you. Marina thought about her studio apartment, about the jar with $47, about 4 years of invisibility. She thought about the girl who'd learned languages to survive becoming the woman who'd used them to actually build something. You can thank me, she said, by delivering those units exactly on time, and somewhere in the growing darkness outside, in a city that contained millions of stories, Marina Volkov's story was finally beginning to be told. The contract with Larsen Industries was signed at 2 a.m. on Friday morning, hours after the successful Tianming call. Witnessed by a lawyer Dmitri summoned who looked annoyed at the hour but professional enough not to complain. Marina signed as translation consultant and communications liaison, a title Dmitri had invented on the spot, which came with a consulting fee that made Marina's hands shake when she saw the number. €15,000 for the work she'd done. 15,000. More money than she'd earned in the last year of serving tables. Money that represented freedom from her landlord's threats, from choosing between groceries and electricity, from the constant mathematical anxiety of poverty. But it wasn't just the money that made her hands shake. It was the way Henrik had looked at her when he signed the investment agreement with Dmitri, like she'd performed a miracle rather than just read documents carefully. It was the way Anders had asked for her contact information, saying he wanted her to review all of Larsen Industries' future international contracts. It was the way Dmitri had handed her a business card as she'd left his office, the thick paper embossed with his company name, with a handwritten note on the back in Russian. Talent is common. Courage is rare. You have both. Marina had taken the card, stumbled out into the early Friday morning darkness around 3 a.m., and caught a bus home as the city began its earliest stirrings. She'd made it to her apartment building, climbed the 3 flights of stairs, unlocked her door, and collapsed on her narrow bed without even taking off her shoes. She'd slept 12 hours straight, dreamless and deep. When she woke, it was Friday afternoon around 3 p.m., and her phone was exploding with messages. The first was from Pascal, her former manager at Le Jardin Etoile. 3 texts, each angrier than the last. Marina, you abandoned your shift last night without notice. This is completely unacceptable and unprofessional. Consider your employment terminated. You need to return your uniform and name tag. The penalty for unreturned property is $200, which will be deducted from your final paycheck. I'm very disappointed in you. I gave you a chance when others wouldn't have hired you, and this is how you repay that trust. Marina read them twice, waiting to feel something. Guilt, regret, anxiety about burning a bridge. But all she felt was a distant sort of pity for Pascal, who lived in a world where keeping a serving job was more important than changing your entire life. She texted back, I'll drop off the uniform tomorrow. Thank you for the opportunity. Best of luck with the restaurant. Marina Volkov wakes after 12 hours of sleep to find her life transformed. The previous night, she had walked out of her waitressing job at Le Jardin Etoile to help prevent a business catastrophe, using her self-taught language skills to save a multimillion-euro manufacturing contract. Now, messages flood her phone from people who've heard about what she did. Her boss Pascal has called repeatedly, furious about her abandoning her shift. Her coworker Sasha is worried and confused by the rumors. But the messages that matter most come from unexpected sources. Anders Larsson reports that production is proceeding smoothly and invites her to Stockholm, expenses paid, to oversee delivery and communications. Marina, who has barely left her city except for one traumatic foster care placement, carefully accepts this unimaginable opportunity. Then Dmitry calls with a proposition. Marina tenses. Foster care taught her that powerful men's propositions are usually dangerous. But Dmitry has been nothing but professional and respectful, treating her as a colleague rather than a commodity. His offer stuns her. A consulting position handling international business communications, paying 10 to 50,000 euros per project. After 6 months to a year, she could become director of international communications at his company with substantial salary and benefits. Marina can barely process the numbers. She walks to her window, looking down at her familiar neighborhood. Mrs. Chun watering tomatoes, kids playing soccer, Mr. Johnson closing his store. Everything she's known suddenly feels both precious and limiting. When she asks why he's offering this, Dmitry explains that he's spent decades assessing people. He sees her potential. Someone who taught herself 5 languages without support, worked factory jobs while studying full-time, and emerged from a devastating childhood not broken but hungry to build something meaningful. He came to America with nothing and understands being judged on background rather than capability. Offering to fund her degree completion isn't generosity, it's strategy. He wants her working for him, fully equipped. Marina mentions she needs to finish her degree. 3 semesters remain. Dmitry immediately offers to cover tuition, calling it an investment in his future employee. Moved nearly to tears, Marina accepts. Her first assignment is Monday, a contract negotiation with a German automotive supplier requiring fluent German and English plus technical manufacturing knowledge. After the call, Marina stares at her studio apartment. The narrow bed, cracked laptop, her grandmother's photograph, the jar with $47. This space that was her entire world now feels too small, like a cocoon that has served its purpose. Her phone explodes with more messages. A business reporter wants to interview her. Henrik Larsson invites her to meet the employees whose jobs she saved. A university professor asks her to speak to his international business negotiation class. A translation company offers contract work. The story is spreading through international business networks with electronic speed. Sasha calls, panicked. Someone from a business magazine came to the restaurant asking for Marina, nearly giving Pascal a stroke. Rumors claim Marina ran off with a billionaire. They arrange to meet the next morning so Marina can explain everything. Overwhelmed but energized, Marina opens her laptop and begins writing everything that happened over the past 36 hours. The words flow in English, shift to Russian as emotions deepen, then to Mandarin for technical precision. She writes until her hands cramp and darkness fills the window outside, extracting every detail from memory and pressing it into language. She begins responding to messages. agreeing to meet Professor Morrison, declining the magazine interview, not ready for that exposure, confirming she'll meet Henrik's employees in Stockholm. Finally, she opens a new email to Dmitry, accepting the consulting position and educational support. She wants him to know she takes the high expectations seriously. Finishing the story, Marina paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to tell Dmitry that what happened with Larsen Industries changed something fundamental inside her, shifted her understanding of what she could become. But the words felt too raw, too personal for a professional email. Instead, she wrote, I also want you to know that what happened with Larsen Industries taught me that the skills I've been building in isolation have real-world value. I'm ready to work hard and prove that your faith in me is justified. I'll see you on Monday. Sincerely, Marina Volkov. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Rising from her desk, Marina walked to the photograph of her grandmother. You always told me that knowledge creates doors where none existed, she whispered in Russian. I think I finally understand what you meant. She changed into fresh clothes, grabbed her wallet, and walked down to the corner store. With careful deliberation, she took the $47 from her jar and bought groceries. Real groceries, not just ramen and rice. Vegetables, fresh bread, cheese, fruit. The small luxury of choosing food without calculating every penny. Walking home with her bags, Marina looked up at the evening sky. Somewhere across an ocean, a factory in Sweden was producing machines that would ship to China, all because she'd been willing to walk away from what was safe and step into what terrified her. Monday would bring new challenges. Stockholm would come soon after. A degree to complete, languages to master at even higher levels, a career to build from scratch. But tonight, Marina Volkov, former foster child, factory worker, dropout waitress, made herself dinner in her small apartment and allowed herself to believe that sometimes, the girl who survives everything finally gets to do more than just survive. She gets to become who she was always meant to be. Thank you for staying with Marina's story to the end. If you enjoyed this journey from invisibility to opportunity, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more stories about people who transform their lives through unexpected moments of courage. Your support makes these stories possible. Until next time.